Okay, 7.5, personality, the psychoanalytic perspective. So remember back to our 6 schools of thought. Psychoanalytic is one of those schools of thought. It is what is in your past or what is in your unconscious. So your past, childhood, unconscious. All right, cool. So the objective for today is students will be able to compare and contrast the psychoanalytic theory of personality with other theories of personality that we are going to talk about tomorrow. Okay, so we are moving on to the personality part of this unit. So we talked about motivation and emotion. Now we're going to talk about what creates who you are as a person and your own personalities. So this should look somewhat familiar to you all because we've talked about this before. This is Freud. Yay! His very famous iceberg. So Freud would use the psychoanalytic theory to determine personality by using what we call free association. And free association is a way to explore the unconscious. And what you would do is you would sit with a therapist and you would say whatever comes to mind without any fear of judgment. So think about like kind of laying on the couch. This would be that type of a theory. You lay on the couch, you talk about anything that comes to your mind, and then the psychoanalytic therapist would use that to determine your personality. And really what they're trying to get to is this unconscious part here. So Freud said that you are divided into 3 things, right? Your consciousness, what you are currently aware of. Your preconscious are things that maybe you are unaware of, but can easily access. And your unconscious are things that you are unaware of and cannot access. So that's what they're trying to access with free association by getting you to talk about things, is to determine what might be underlying in your personality. And since you're divided into these 3 components, there's 3 parts of your personality that are part of this conscious, preconscious, and your unconscious. The first is the id. Notice that the id is completely in your unconscious. Your id is what we call your pleasure principle. It seeks immediate gratification. Now, obviously, as adults, we know that we can't have immediate gratification for all things. As a little kid, we see this more often. They're more driven by their id. So that's where we have your ego, which is the exact opposite of your id. And your ego is going to be... Okay, so then we have our superego. And the superego is going to be the exact opposite of your id, right? So your superego is what we would call your internalized ideals. Internalized ideals. So this would be something like above and beyond, like your morals, your values. which again, sometimes we can't always have. So your ego is going to be your compromise between the two. Your ego is what we call the reality principle. So it tries to take these two things and compromise between the two of them. And this is what makes up your personality, according to Freud and the psychoanalytic theory. So it is your pleasure principle, your superego is your morals and your values, and the ego is the thing that brings those two together to make you who you are. Okay, so Freud said that part of your personality was developed through the psychosexual stages as you developed, and these are the developmental stages. The first is oral, that you receive pleasure, centers on the mouth by sucking, biting, and chewing. Anal, pleasure focused on bowel and bladder elimination, coping with demands for control. So think about potty training in this age. Phallic is a pleasure zone, is in the genitals, coping with incestuous sexual feelings. Yes, it would be you are in love with your mother or father. So we have the Oedipus. We also have the Electra complex. Think about your Greek mythology. Okay. This is where you fall in love with mom. This is when you fall in love with the dad, according to Freud. Latency is the dormant sexual feelings, identification process, you're identifying as with a gender, and then genital is sexual interests. Now, this is obviously very much disregarded now, but it is something important to know because it's a basis for where we kind of get a lot of different theories that are more common today. One thing to notice that Freud said would talk about is fixation, and that is when you get stuck in a theory or you get locked in one of these stages. So an example might be if you are locked in the oral stage, you may become a smoker or overeat as you get older. And again, these aren't really looked upon as more of like a historical aspect, not a reality aspect anymore. Freud also had a strong belief in defense mechanisms for your personality, that this is what you go through when you are put in an anxiety arousing situation. You may go through one of these phases. I do want you to know them. The assignment for this unit is you identifying people in these different stages. What you really need to know, though, is that there is very little support for these in today's society. Very little support that these stages disguise some sort of a sexual and aggressive impulse. Whoops, sorry. So essentially that, yes, people might displace their anger, right? That you might yell at something that didn't have anything to do with your original anger. But what they're saying is it's not because of sexual or aggressive impulse, right? People just displace anger, maybe because it's easier, maybe because it's more convenient, whatever the case may be, but it's not, there's not some underlying sexual or aggressive reason for that. Where Freud believed the reason that you would displace your anger is because there's some underlying sexual or aggressive feeling. And here's where we get into the more modern view. This is where I'm going to spend a little bit more time on what we call the neo-Freudians, modern view. So this is psychoanalytic theory, or at this point in time, maybe moving on to what we'd call the psychodynamic still this idea that your unconscious in childhood impacts you, but a much more modernized viewpoint of it from Freud. But again, the Freud is important because it set that base for us, right? So the first one we have here is Alfred Adler. And what he is known for is what we call the inferiority complex. And what he said is that as we age, our personality is developed by our ability to conquer childhood inferiority. Now, it's also important to know that for Adler, he suffered a lot when he was a child. He was sickly, so he had a lot of inferiority to overcome, which would probably had a lot to say about his personality. Not every child, though, has to overcome some sort of childhood inferiority. They may not have had that. So this doesn't apply to everybody. Then we have Karen Horney. And she said that childhood anxiety triggers your desire for love. Oh, sorry, team. Misspelled something. Boo. And security. Now, this can be called into question if there's a lot of anxiety, right? So you can start to question your security and love if we see a lot of anxiety, according to Karen Horney. She also questioned Freud's penis envy. And really, so Freud essentially said that women develop penis envy, which is what allows them to identify with their mothers because they don't have a penis like their fathers. And Karen Horney essentially said that's not true. Like, we don't have penis envy. Sorry, Freud. And then we have Carl Jung, is how you pronounce his name. Oops, it's Jung, but it's pronounced Yoong is how you pronounce his last name. And he said that we all have this collective unconscious. And we've talked about this before, so this may sound familiar to some of you. So he said that it's a common reservoir of images derived from the species universal experiences. So again, all of these people are either dealing with childhood or your unconscious, and that is what they're saying is developing your personality. Psychoanalytic theorists would test your personality using projective tests. So this is your personality test. And what you are doing is you are projecting your inner dynamics, your what we would call unconscious, right? Your unconsciousness onto the test. There's two. We've got the Rorschach inkblot. This is where, you would describe what you see. And then a therapist would be able to say, based on your responses, this is what we think. Then we also have what we call the TAT test, or the thematic apperception test. And this is where you tell a story about a picture. And again, the idea being that they can tell your unconscious or your id based off of what you say, based off of your story. And two terms that are just important to know with the modern unconscious mind is there's two beliefs. First is the false conscientious effect, and this is the tendency to overestimate the extent to which others share our beliefs and behaviors. So you may feel like some of your friends or family may feel the exact same way you are, when the reality of it is they may not. And then the second is terror management theory, and this is the theory of death-related anxiety. It explores our emotional and behavioral responses. So what you see is that if you have some sort of fear of death or some sort of anxiety related to that, that can impact your personality and behavior in certain events.